This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl. Tim, you mentioned something that was most unappetizing. Please go ahead and ruin my appetite.
We were making jokes about microphones and things being hard near your face and all that stuff, which of course brings us to some current events, which Ron Jeremy's in the news. 20 more women came out. He already had a few that were, going after him for sexual assault. And
now, if anybody doesn't know who Ron Jeremy is, he is one of the ugliest, most disgusting, troll-like porn stars ever. His very presence in porno should have been a crime. Carry on.
So yeah, he's now officially being charged for raping 7 women, assaulting 10, including a 15-year-old. He's facing up to 250 years in prison.
Watching one of his pornos is like being in hell for 250 years.
I will see what happens, because I know from people I know, I'm not going to mention them, that he goes to, even after his quote unquote hard day at work, he'll still go to sex clubs and stuff. So he's definitely, I guess he's come across pedestrians and he's applied some of his roles that he plays to them. And not
on a better pornographic topic, I was very happy to see Larry Flynn come out, because one of his enemies, of course, Falwell Sr. and the so-called moral majority. And one thing I love about Larry Flynn is, porno, whatever. Look, the guy took a bullet for freedom. He's always been after hypocritical politicians, especially Christian or evangelical. And he's really going after Falwell Jr. now, because, this is the problem. At least if you're a pornographer and you admit you're a pornographer, but how much pornography is there? We know at the Vatican they won't let us in. Within all of these perverse religions. How many pedo priests do we have to, how many, sex scandals do we have to encounter? This is what it is. And of course, Falwell's being one of Trump presidential perversion's largest donators.
Well, that article, it's an op-ed that Larry Flynn wrote, called My Final Farewell to the Falwells. And basically, it's kind of an interesting article because, of course, Jerry Sr. was the one that basically took him, it went all the way to the Supreme Court with the movie it was partially about. It went for years, and it was one of the great victories for the First Amendment in modern history. Larry Flynn coming out victorious. And strangely enough, he became friends with Jerry Falwell Sr. because they were both being invited to these kind of university debates about First Amendment. So they were traveling together to the point where Jerry Falwell Sr. was sending Larry Flynn Christmas cards. But he definitely does not spare his son in this op-ed, and he doesn't spare Jim Baker or any of those guys.
Back up for 1 minute. The moral majority, stop right there. It's fucking ridiculous.
I heard an interesting, I think Jim Baker's son, who's not on the same side of his dad, just wrote a memoir about growing up in that, he and Tammy Faye, because Tammy Faye actually became, strangely enough, a huge ally with the gay community, because she had, in all these TV evangelists, there's all these, I don't know if they're closeted or just people that are gay that are around them that are maybe right-wingers. But she became friends with a lot of gay men. And then the whole AIDS epidemic, she was a voice, and she went back on a lot of the things she had said earlier. All right, so we have 2 pornographers. Let's talk about the pornography.
I want to talk about Larry Flynn just for 1 minute more, because forget the tits and ass, forget the woman in a meat grinder. Remember, he quite single-handedly called out a lot of this hypocrisy and took a bullet for it, more so than just about anybody else. It's interesting that in the past, we'll say in the 70s and 80s, there were pornographers that, even though Larry Flynn was quite harsh with what he represented, but still market for everything and whatever, you don't have to look at it if you don't like it, they still had another side to them that was far more moral, artistic, and integral than a lot of these politicians.
I would agree, although there are a lot of debates about Hugh Hefner. He did throw some of his colleagues under the bus during the obscenity law.
I'm not saying they're not creeps.
I'm saying he was a little bit of a hypocrite.
I'm not saying they're not creeps. I'm saying they have some cultural value, because Go back and look at, I mean, Jean Genet in Playboy magazine in like 69, Madeline Murray O'Hare, my hero, who like got rid of prayer in school, most hated woman in America. There were a lot of amazing interviews in that. You know, that was at a time when actually, again, it was kind of a sexual liberation. And going back to our first guest, Kit Natividad, some women did not feel exploited by being sexually liberated at that point. And it was a very different time and a very different atmosphere. Anyway, let's go on to what I call the real pornography.
Well, there's a lot of stuff. Oh,
well,
God.
I'm going to start with this.
Please.
That dump truck, also known as Trump, aka, I love this quote about him, the elderly relative in cognitive decline, gave an absolutely insane interview with his favorite Fox News this week, which was probably the most blatant and ridiculous example of his verbal diarrhea yet, claiming people in the dark shadows are controlling Joe Biden's campaign and orchestrating the protests nationwide. When asked who he thought was pulling Biden's strings, he said, people that you've never heard of, people that are controlling the streets, some very stupid, rich people. God. What, is he controlling Biden? He then went on a rambling about, and this is an old conspiracy, but that's all he believes in, an airplane completely loaded with thugs dressed in black, planning on doing big damage. I wish they would have, to the RNC, that is the retarded Nazi convention, which just happened, as if anyone could do more damage than what was done by his Stepford children and his moronic, robotic wife. Now, just to follow up this thread before I allow you to take the stage. He was also discussing how police who shot Jacob like 7 times in the back, he said, well, they're officers, they choke. It's just like a golf tournament. They miss a 3-foot putt.
Yes,
and this asinine statement was on his way to Kenosha, where Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back and paralyzed. Yep. And his parents rightfully refused to meet with the commander in charge. He's so delusional, he claims that his visit to Kenosha is going to help racial healing.
Well,
he claims not to have had a series of strokes in November.
Wow, that one.
No, carry on.
He did go to Kenosha today. He only met with the cops and basically Trump supporting business owners who said, oh, if the National Guard was called earlier, this wouldn't burn down. Well, how about if you didn't shoot this guy 7 fucking times, it wouldn't burn down?
How about if every day there's not a shooting of another unarmed black man?
God. Trump's strategies are always very confusing. So he was clearly in the RNC who was trying to court some black voters. Obviously, he's not going to get the majority. Yet he shows up to Kenosha.
Once again, and black people are smarter than that.
He's starting to, call the police officers in this town, which is, turns out they actually have a terrible history of this stuff. So he's there condoning their behavior and their existence. And guess what? It's just like watching the RNC. I watch it, I'm like, I don't think this can work. But now, then you think, you walk down the street and you see just typical Americans and you're like, maybe it will work.
All right, well,
I don't fucking know.
Speaking about the police force, what about these ketamine cops now? Shooting people up with ketamine.
I know nothing about this.
This is going on.
They're walking around with syringes and shooting people.
They are calling paramedics. And after they have somebody tied up and handcuffed on the ground who is not combating them.
Oh, boy.
And one guy died in Colorado being shot up with too much ketamine.
Okay, I've never heard of that. That doesn't sound legal.
Well, my theories about ketamine. It may work on an elephant, but it didn't work on me.
Oh, the K-hole can be scary. That's fucking for sure.
I guess you've been there, I haven't. Just to carry on, speaking about imbecility.
Yes.
Of course, you know why Trump wants the sports to continue, because owners and CEOs from almost every major sport have donated to his 2020 re-election campaign and his 2016 campaign.
Oh, yeah.
So it's no wonder he wants the games to go on. And of course, he wants school to open. Now, okay, in spite of the fact there's still 1,000 people dying a day in the USA from COVID, and there's 41,000 new cases every day, and in one university, at the University of Alabama alone, 1,043 new cases in 2 weeks. And Rank, of course, represents one of the largest coronavirus clusters reported, which just goes to show, just because you go to college doesn't mean you're fucking smart. What the hell are you doing? And you know where the biggest uprising in COVID is right now?
Iowa?
South Dakota.
Oh, whoa. Okay. Well, you're close
Alabama.
to Iowa. Yeah, these places. Well, that's interesting you say this because I've been predicting this for a while, and I think it's going to happen just based on the airline industry having to stay in business and just international business in general. Today, and I think everyone's watching, Costa Rica opened up flights from a selected few states. You have to show your ID, and they're all in the Northeast. And then on the 15th, a few more will be added. And those states include Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, New York and New Jersey, and Connecticut were the hotspot. Vermont, Virginia, DC, and then in a couple of weeks will be Massachusetts, Colorado, and Pennsylvania.
Are you proposing we take a little trip there, Tim Dole?
Well, I'm reading between the lines. I think the EU, I think certain countries or certain areas are going to be watching this, and I think there's going to be a point where the real generators of commerce, money, and many ideas are going to be like, you know what, Alabama, you know what, South Dakota, we're not waiting for you, and we are going to move on because we are doing certain things correctly, and you've done a lot of things incorrectly.
Right. And you know what? I'm sorry, but the problem is with a lot of these protests right now, and I'm not talking about the Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about, well, whatever the protests that have no names, for instance, the ones that are going on in Portland for 103 days, where the people that have been arrested are coming in from other different states and doing the looting and the damaging. This is really problematic because people, not only are they not, for the most part, most of the protesters they can't social distance, but they are wearing masks. They're not the ones that are looting. We know that a lot of the looting and violence is actually right-wing, pro-Trump, patriotic militia, or just the occasional lunatic. So
I have a good connection here, and this is what I'm trying to wrap my head around here. What Biden and Harris are sold as and what they are, and what Trump is sold as and what he is. And it seems to be always the opposite. So, you know, this article came out about Biden basically being more aggressive about mass incarceration when he was a senator under Reagan. Reagan was like, we don't want to spend more money on all this. And Biden, and just like Clinton later, the Republicans had it sold to America that the Democrats were weak on crime and foreign policy. So a few ambitious bros were like, we got to change that. And of course, they're willing to throw millions of people in jail in order to position themselves with their own ambitions and careers. And honestly, Biden has a terrible record with this.
And Kamala Harris doesn't have much better.
She has a terrible. So what I'm saying is like, but yet the Republicans are saying far left anarchy, socialist. Biden's like way off. Actually, quite the opposite. Now, Trump's up there like, I'm pro-cop, but it seems like he's actually pro-anarchy.
Well, of course he's promoting anarchy because he wants the chaos. And by the way, when I first started talking about prison under Clinton, there were 900,000 people incarcerated. Now there's 2.6 million incarcerated, 6 million on probation, and we multiply that by all the family members that have been affected by the prison industrial complex. And I want to talk about that for a minute. Please. I want to talk about corporate slavery. First of all, America has obviously 10, 20, or 100 times more per capita prisoners than anywhere in the world, including China and Russia. Prison labor in the United States is referred to as insourcing under the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. So employers receive a tax credit of $2,400 for every work release inmate they employ as a reward for hiring risky target groups. Now, according to the Left Business Observer, the federal prison industrial produces 100% of all military helmets. Workers supply 98% of the entire market for equipment assembly services, 93% of paints and paintbrushes, 92% of stove assembly, 46% of body armor, 36% of home appliances, 30% of headphones, microphones, speakers, 21% of office furniture, airplane parts, medical supplies, and much more. Now, 1 minute. Prisoners are even training seeing eye dogs for blind people. Now, with all that productivity, with those 2.6 million people incarcerated, inmates make about 90 cents to $4 a day. Now, let me tell you some of the biggest supporters of the prison industrial complex. McDonald's, Wendy's, Starbucks, Victoria's Secret, Verizon, Sprint, Kmart, JCPenney, American Airlines, and Avis, who use inmates to take reservations. And let me just finish this with some cosmetic companies that also support Trump. And ladies, take note, because just stop buying this crap. Estee Lauder, for instance, which owns Clinique, it owns MAC. Actually, the employees at Estee Lauder wanted to get the heir of the Lauder fortune kicked off.
Oh, I heard about
because
that.
He was a Trump supporter. So we also have Revlon, Almay, Elizabeth Arden, Bumble and Bumble, Avida. All of these cosmetic companies are supporting Trump. So ladies, it's a good thing we're not wearing that much makeup because we have the masks on. What can I say? Go back to Kohl eyeliner.
Well, I mean, Trump's relationship with mass incarceration is really all over the map. It's kind of like Trump. It's like you just don't really know what's going on. So he has pardoned some people.
Like 5. All of his criminal friends.
Well, he pardons all of them, but he mass incarcerates like Mexicans who are kids. You know, it puts them not even in an official prison, but in these cages. Yusuf Salami, one of the Central Park Five, you know, Trump took out a full ad saying, I'm not looking to psychoanalyze or understand them. I'm looking to punish them. So he's just kind of, he's Trump.
Look, but he doesn't know what he's fucking talking about on any front. He releases or pardons a few people. Oh, thank you, Kim Kardashian. You got 3 people out of prison. You know what? Why don't you pay some people's rent for the next 10 years? And by the way, why don't you incarcerate that idiot who you live with, who pretends he's running for president, who needs medical care immediately? I'm not even going to mention his name. He's that dumb.
If Biden loses, they're going to say, okay, Democrats, it's Hillary all over again. If he wins, we're going to say, hey, it's Obama all over again. I mean, just based on a lot of the...
Look, you know what? If he wins, and he should, except, of course, Trump is trying every which way to prevent that. But the thing is, it doesn't matter what he once stood for, even Kamala Harris. It's the people that they're going to have behind them, and they know there has to be a change. The difference is Trump doesn't want to change anything. He wants the chaos to continue. He wants the corporations to make the money. He doesn't give a shit about the individual. He hates his fucking supporters. They'd never be allowed into any of his bed bug infested golf course hotels, of which he's profiting from, which he shouldn't. We're not even going to we don't even have time to discuss all the fucking crimes he's committed. The thing is, Trump has to win because if he doesn't, him, Ivanka, and his 2 idiot sons, maybe even his moronic wife, that robot, are all going to the big house. And I have always said, let's turn the White House into the big house because that's where most of the criminals live. Anything else we need to discuss?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, Barr, the Attorney General, who runs
Trump's fan club,
who runs a committee that is supposed to brief Congress on the election process to make sure it's going smoothly and fairly, and of course, there's new intelligence talking about meddling, whether it's from a business or a foreign country or whatever. He announced that he will no longer be briefing Congress, and they're zipping this, and everyone's going to be in the dark. So transparency is basically he's putting his middle finger up to transparency. Hopefully, people won't be pushed around by this.
People have been standing up. They've been marching for fucking miles, days, weeks, and months. Is it going to do any good?
We are about to find out.
Well, Pelosi and Schumer and even Nadler can complain all they want, but they're dealing with near to the tombstone Republican brainwashed political hucksters who are corporate and war hawks waiting to get the big payoff, so they suck Trump's dick, and they're not going to change anything with that.
The ticket last week that you claimed you would like to see run would be Cornel West with Jesse Ventura.
Well, that's in a pipe dream.
Now those two are joining up with, I forget the guy's name. There's a third party that they're going to try to start for.
It's a little late.
No. For 2022, 2024, and the rules are no money from corporations, no money from the military, no money from any of this. Oh, great! I almost forgot this story. So they think there's a serial killer in Fort Hood. They found the 10th body of a soldier today in the woods, and started with that woman, I forget her name, and they keep on finding corpses in Fort Hood, and they're investigating it. I think the general that was running it had to step down.
I mean, Fort Hood, what an appropriate name for a bunch of fucking hoodlums.
You would think with all that surveillance, military surveillance they would have there, that they couldn't catch a serial killer. Maybe it was a general. Maybe it was some high-end officer or whatever.
The level of corruption in this country at every level. Actually, I'm very interested in this book that's just coming out, and it's called The Violence Within Us by Chris Murphy. And it's about the amount of violence. This is not new in America.
No, well, we just
have better reporting about it. I mean, again, if I have to, and I will, because I am the woman on the fucking hill with a bullhorn screaming into the void, say that America has, for only 10 years America's existence, have we been out of war.
Well, this vigilante boy, Kyle, what's his last name? The one that, yes. And this is the message I was talking to you the other night, and I got to give it to some of you boys out there if you're listening. Incels, I never imagined when I was a kid that the real Revenge of the Nerds would be this violent. And between the tech boys, basement dwelling, incel, Asperger's, video games nerds, it's getting pretty ugly out there. So my message to them, go get a prostitute, just get laid, but just don't stop taking it out on us. Please. I'm actually asking nicely, please just stop. All right. So on a lighter note, more animal stories. Kings Beach, California, which is on Lake Tahoe. The bears there have figured this out because they keep on coming back, and there's a store full of just customers. I mean, they don't even care. They go right in, and it just one after the other, and they just wolf down all the snacks. Like
one bear after another.
No, they keep on coming. It's like a family. They haven't attacked anyone. The surveillance camera. They keep on coming back. They realize that all they do is stand near the door. It just opens for them, and they just kind of slowly, like boom, 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 just walk in there and systematically just start chips, cookies, candy bars. They just start just eating up the whole store. People are banging cans, trying to get them out. They just take their time and leave every day. And
well, Tim, that makes me question what your favorite snacks are.
Oh,
and this is one of the games we play on tour. Let me just fill you in a little bit of the retrovirus van stories. Tim has this game where he asks someone, usually Weasel, because I won't play this game.
What do you prefer,
Fritos to Cheetos?
Well,
I'm just asking what your favorite snack is, Tim.
I mean, that's a common. I have a lot of favorite snacks. Some that are healthier than others. I mean, come on.
You know what? The only snacks I like are called Lunchables. And Tim, I would consider you a Lunchable. I just saw a pretty interesting film, and it leads up to our next guest, called Shirley, about Shirley Jackson, who I might have mentioned last week, but I saw the film, mostly female directed, produced. It's on Hulu, and it's about Shirley Jackson, who wrote The Lottery, The Haunting of Hill House, We've Always Lived in the Castle. And it's about, it's another story about writing is a lonely sport. Many writers, mostly you hear about, alcoholic writers that were men, or the degeneration of mental capabilities because you're stuck in a room alone with your own mind going crazy. I thought this film, Shirley, was pretty good, and it really is about this relationship between Shirley Jackson, her husband, who's a prick of a professor, and this young couple that comes to stay with them for a little while to work at the school, and the relationship she develops with the woman. And it's kind of witchy, it's kind of creepy, but it just shows, the perspective of a female writer who, is just losing her mind trying to write about the horror within. And that brings us up to our next guest, Kier-La Janisse, House of Psychotic Women, coming at you right now. We're in Los Angeles with the Lydian spin, Tim Dahl. Helicopters are overhead. The sounds of LA are helicopter sirens and dogs. We have Kier-La Janisse here with us now, who is the author of House of Psychotic Women. An absolutely mandatory read. It's kind of an encyclopedia of horror films and the way that women have been depicted in them, and somehow in accordance with Kier-La's own life. Is that an apt description, Dahl?
Yeah. I mean, I think the women in horror films that depict pretty much neurotic women, like different sort of variations of neurosis. You know, it goes from like mild neurosis to total hysteria and psychosis and stuff. And so it's sort of looking at those types of characters in horror.
Painting women as either the victim or the victim that becomes the victimizer, proliferating their own destruction and violence.
Yeah,
like
and I think
woman as object.
Well, I think a lot of the characters in the book, a lot of it is really focused on trauma. So it's like not really dealing with sadistic female characters in horror as much as it's dealing with characters who are reacting to some sort of trauma.
Stockholm syndrome from abuse, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it was quite a undertaking. I mean, it took you 10 years to complete.
Yeah, a big part of that is because I would stop writing and throw it out a lot of times. Like I would write some of it and I would hate it and I would throw it out and start over again. And so that's really why it took
as
that
Hubert
long.
Selby described the last book he wrote, which took him 16 years, is like sometimes it becomes like a ghost in the doorway that won't let you in. Did you ever feel like...
I felt like so many times like I should just give it up, and especially when the internet when I started writing it, the internet was still kind of in its early stages, and so movie blogs and things like that didn't exist as much. And by the time I was finishing it, movie blogs had proliferated, and then I was like, well, what's the point of writing a bunch of reviews of movies when there's all this great writing online already about movies? And that was when it sort of switched to be sort of autobiographical.
It's far more than reviews of movies because it's really an in-depth study. I mean, the likes of which I don't think exist anywhere outside of your book that really goes into in-depth, not only films that some of us might know, but quite a few films that we might not know about, which I think that's why it's encyclopedic.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I was finishing it, I was like, oh, everybody's heard of all these movies. Nobody's going to want it.
No, I hadn't.
And then, when it came out, people were making lists of the movies and trying to track them all down. And I guess when you're immersed in that world where you're watching horror movies all the time, you think everybody's seen all those movies. And
I mean, so
haven't.
at what age in the early life of your familial trauma did you know you had to make something more of it than just surviving the experience of being born into an insane family?
Well, I mean, I started writing horror stories and stuff like that when I was young. I would write probably
9, 10.
like 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like being scared as a child?
I liked being scared, and the things that scared me were interesting because it changed over time. When I was really young, I was really afraid of supernatural, ghost-related stories. When I first heard of all the Friday the 13th and slasher movies, my mom would let me watch pretty much any horror movie I wanted, but I sort of self-censored, and I made a decision that I didn't want to watch slasher films because I felt like I wasn't old enough to deal with human killers.
Little did you know how attracted you would become to not only the movies, but the killers themselves later on.
Well, I guess kids are such in the fantasy land, and the paranormal and ghost stories are attractive. And then, especially as a woman develops, the fucking homicidal man with a knife chasing you in the fucking woods. Yeah.
I find ghosts, whatever you want to call a ghost, and what is a ghost to you?
A ghost to me? I don't know. It's like a stuck spirit.
I think a ghost is too much electricity that doesn't know where to go. So you can call it a stuck spirit. Yeah. It's a stuck electrical current that can manifest in many different ways. Also, one thing about like people that experience strange or paranormal phenomena, I mean, all these Ghostbuster shows, a lot of times it's actually carbon monoxide poisoning, which leads to hallucinations, which then causes us either our minds to expand to accept that there might be other there are so many dimensions we can't even see.
Hallucinations, Salem witch trials, the bread, the fungus that grew, hallucinated.
Well, rye bread being poisoned caused hallucinations, which led to the witch hunts and werewolf sightings and all of that, and LSD. But so 8 or 9, you start writing horror stories, but what were you watching at the time?
At the time, I would have been watching movies like, God, I mean, I watched The Entity quite young, which I probably shouldn't have been watching. Were you? I would have been, about 9. Yeah, I think.
What about The Haunting of Hill House, based on the book by Shirley Jackson?
I mean, that I saw. I think I saw that fairly young because it would play on TV.
You had made this decision about what you were going to tolerate and accept, and at what age. So, was there an age where you're like, okay, it's time for the slasher films to come in?
Yeah, probably about 12.
That's when it starts.
Yeah, well,
and it was
kind
weird
of parallel
because there's an actual like clear distinction in things in my life when that happened too, where it was like when I was a kid, I had a recurrent nightmare, and it started from like the first horror movie I ever saw was this movie called Horror Express. And in that movie, there's like a Russian priest who gets possessed and is killing people on a train. But I couldn't remember what movie it was I'd seen because I was too young. I was like 3 or something. And so I had this dream every night of this man that lived in my closet. And the dream would always be exactly the same, where this man who, in my dream, he had fluorescent green eyes. And I would wake up and there'd be like scratching coming from inside the door. And then I would see this hand opening the door. And then the guy would sort of step out of the closet and he would start like calling me to the closet. And I would always get up and go to the closet. And then as soon as I would get to the door, there'd be like this long staircase going down and he would be standing at the bottom with his arms out like
waiting
this.
For you.
And then somebody would push me from behind and right as he was about to catch me, I would wake up. But I had this dream until I was about 12. And then it stopped. Okay. It just stopped. And then I kind of forgot I ever had it until I was about 18 and I had like OD'd.
What did you OD on?
Just sleeping pills.
Why would you take sleeping pills?
Well, I was that age, where people kill themselves and stuff.
Oh, it was an attempted suicide.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that it was a really weird period of my teenage years. A very tumultuous emotional period where a lot of times I had a lot of anger and I also had a lot of self-loathing too. So I had outward anger, but I also, I was kind of. In terms of the environment that I was in, I was relatively powerless. And I think that's why it ended up being self-directed a lot of times.
Which is what most children are in, a powerless relationship in the insane fascist microcosm of a nuclear family.
Going back to before 18 and the overdose, you're in this between 12 and 18 period of, I guess, slasher films are what you're suddenly obsessed with?
I was watching slasher films. I was very obsessed with gore.
Yeah,
I went through a period where I was I just wanted to see really gory stuff.
What years are you talking about?
This would have been in the 80s.
80s.
So, and it's like those years were like when all the effects artists were like rock stars, and so all the horror magazines, you knew all their names.
Why do you think you originally turned to horror to escape the horror of your family situation? Because it's kind of weird, like, this is terrible, I'm going for something even worse.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of that type of behavior, not even just watching horror movies, but other types of self-destructive behavior is a way of, but it's also a way of controlling it.
Yeah, it's anxiety. You want to get close. I insisted when I was 7 years old, I insisted when my grandmother was on her deathbed that my mom took me into the ICU to see her. I was not prepared for that. But even at a young age, that kind of death, primal fear or obsession with death, I wanted to see, of course. It was brutal for me. But I can relate to that. I mean, attracted to these extremely stressful
But you were
points.
attracted to horror films the way that other people have been attracted to music. Like they decide they're going to become musicians or painters or filmmakers. And you were attracted to horror as not only a release, but something that's actually topping the real life horror.
Yeah, but it was also something that I found very creative. Like there were a lot of creative avenues through it, because I wasn't a participatory horror fan in the way that I didn't make monster masks or paint models or things like that.
Would you paint yourself into the films you saw?
I definitely related to a lot of the characters. And I mean, I was obsessed with the book Carrie.
The book more than the movie.
Well, and the movie too, but I read the book pretty young. And I would do my book report on it every year in school because we had different teachers.
Whether they liked it or not.
Well, they didn't know that I was doing it again.
So because I know a little bit about this subject, and of course, the gorier and more graphic those 80s horror movies became, there's that tipping point into the absurdist where it's silly. Did you enjoy the silliness of it?
No, I actually hated that part of it. I never liked the sort of wisecracking killers and stuff.
So what were some of your favorite films at that period? Like in the when you're into slasher films. What were some of your favorites?
I definitely liked Friday the 13th Part 2 for some reason because I think it was like the final girl in that movie. It's like the first where she uses psychology to kind of
describe what Final Girl is, because not everybody knows what that is, but can you just tell us what that is?
Yeah, the Final Girl is a theory that Carol Clover came up with originally in an essay that became the book Men, Women, and Chainsaws, which is considered one of the sort of foundational horror texts. And she came up with this theory that in slasher films, there is almost always a sole female survivor of the movie that often will have androgynous attributes, so she'll often have an androgynous name, or she'll often have characteristics that like she can fix cars, or something like that. She'll
Knows
have
how
like
to
a
use a
tomboyish
gun. Or a hatchet.
character, and that she will often be like aware of the danger way before everybody else.
Who are just dumbly going into their own death.
Right.
And there's also an interesting dynamic in Friday the 13th too, because it's actually Jason's the killer, not the mother, like in part one.
Right.
And it's a man-female relationship at that point that really shifts with the final, what do you call the final woman? It's a different relationship, although I guess Jason at the end attacks her from the boat or something like that.
Yeah. So in the first movie, it's the mother. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the mother.
I mean, what disappointed me about most horror of that genre at that period is I see a man in a mask like that, I'm going to laugh my ass off. I'm going to try to pull it off his face and kick him in the balls. It's like, first of all, I mean, in real life, because people are dumb enough to walk into their own death, I think what saved me is I would just laugh. And, if you don't have fear, they don't have the power. Unless they have a bigger
Sort of,
gun than
unless
I do.
unless you're small and weak.
Did you ever see Friday?
I don't care how small and weak you are. You can still crack a dick or bust their fucking nuts. Or
Jason-
poke their eyes out or punch them in the throat. Or pick up a rock and knock them in the head. Just saying.
Yeah.
Is Jason Takes Manhattan, is that Friday the 13th 8?
Yeah.
That was one of the silliest fucking
That is-
things I've
yeah.
ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Too dumb. Too dumb.
So you're watching.
Say something? I'm sorry.
David Jones.
I was going to do a walk on here.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just think it's funny that recently, or not too long ago, I read somebody had said something about 9-inch. I call it 9-inch toenails. That if they are Freddy Krueger, then I'm Hannibal Lecter.
Nice.
That's a compliment.
Like that.
That's a compliment.
I know.
Well, I mean, we can talk about that.
Freddy Krueger, I have to say, even though it's snarky and kind of comedic, I wish I had fingernails that long and that metallic. Freddy's a creep.
Or
and
like
I do
Coffin
like
Joe.
And I do like creeps. And Coffin Joe, many people don't know about the Coffin Joe. I was talking about that the other day. Is that Brazilian?
Brazil, yeah.
It's a Brazilian series of horror films. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, so Jose Mojica Morens, he actually just passed away like 2 weeks ago, but was kind of the first Brazilian horror icon. He made the film At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul in 1964, and that became kind of like a huge phenomena in Brazil, where he ended up making a trilogy of films, although the third one took like 30 or 40 years to finish. But in the meantime, he had become such a cultural icon that there were like folk songs that incorporated him, comic books, they had like Bubble Bath, of like Coffin Joe, like all kinds of things.
Did he own all the rights to all this stuff?
I think so.
Yeah.
But actually maybe not, because he wasn't that wealthy.
Yeah,
so
you'd think so if it's so huge.
But a lot of people, when Freddy Krueger came out, a lot of people would make that comparison because Coffin Joe had like the long fingernails and stuff.
I revisited the Dawkins Dream Warrior video not that long ago, and what's so funny about Freddy Krueger at the end? Well, first of all, when Dawkins comes through the walls, and at the end, it's his nightmare. It is Dawkins. Yeah. That's his horror movie, and at the end he's covering his ears because the music's so bad, and then he's like, "Who were those guys?" Yeah. I thought that was a pretty good movie.
Was it not? Was Robert Englund not in a film called Alligator with Carolyn Jones?
He was in.
Oh, Alligator.
Was it Alligator or was it? He was
Lake
in
Placid?
Eaten Alive.
No.
I think he was in Eaten Alive.
I know. All I remember is
Hooper
this, and
one.
tell me if it was Robert Englund. The opening scene is a man's crotch unzipping, and he says, "My name is Buck, and I came here to fuck."
I don't know if he says I'm here to fuck, but I feel like my name is Buck is something that he says. I feel like that might be in Eaten Alive.
And unfortunately, Carolyn Jones, whether it was Allie, we'll look up what the film was. She was way past her prime, and she plays the owner, I think, of a motel where alligators eat people.
Okay, not Motel Hell.
Yeah, no, I think that's Eaten Alive. Like
it
Neville,
could be called
Neville
Eaten Alive.
Brand.
Yeah, okay.
So what about women in horror production? I mean, isn't the producer of Blood Diner a woman or a director?
Director Jackie Kong.
Yeah. Are there many? Because I don't know. Are there many women in horror production?
There's way more now, but there weren't a whole lot. They were sporadic. There have been women in horror, obviously, since the very beginning.
Give us some
of horror.
examples.
Stephanie Rothman did The Velvet Vampire. Karen Arthur did The Mafu Cage in the 70s with Carol Kane, which is amazing. It's in my book.
The House of Psychotic Women.
Jackie Kong did Blood Diner. Mary Lambert did The First Pet Cemetery.
That was a good one.
They're kind of spread out, but I feel as though now it's kind of like over the last 10 years it's really exploded.
Yeah,
and
well,
now
in a different type of horror, Mary Herron did American Psycho.
Yeah.
Which was superlative.
A masterpiece, yeah.
Yeah.
A masterpiece. When did you realize that? Because you were writing horror stories from a very early age, same way I was writing terrible poetry from a very early age. When did you know, okay, I'm going to do something more with this?
It actually took a while because I would write these little horror stories in school, and I
guess they loved you for that.
I wrote this series called Nightmares, and it was like every year I would write a new one. And by the time I got to the fourth one, I think I was in grade 8, and my teacher allowed me to read it in front of class for a grade. So I read this story that was just full of gore. There was like babies being killed and stuff. And,
I wrote stories like
my
that
whole
too.
class like loved it. They're laughing and stuff, and I couldn't believe that. Like nowadays, like if you would, I would have been sent to the counselor.
Where did you go to school?
That.
Where were you going?
This
where
was
were you
in Windsor, Ontario.
Okay, Canada.
My school was called Our Lady of Lourdes. Was a Catholic school.
You went to a Catholic school.
I went to Holy Redeemer, and my father was Canadian.
But it was like for a while, I definitely wanted to be a writer. I was like, I want to be a horror writer, and I thought I would write horror fiction. And I was actually inspired not by anything horror at all, but by like S.E. Hinton, who had written The Outsiders, because she wrote The Outsiders when she was
a teenager.
16.
Yeah, really young.
And also,
so
it's real life horror
Yeah.
stories based on violence and bullyism and all of this, the real life traumas.
Yeah. But I read that as a kid and was so impressed that she was a teenager that I was like, by the time I'm 16, I'm going to write a novel. And so I started writing a novel when I was probably 14, and I had decided that my first novel was going to be about a euthanasia case. So it was about a court case.
Whoa.
And I interviewed all these lawyers and stuff. It was so ridiculous. It was called Garden of Serenity after the Ramones song. It was so cheesy.
You gotta dive in.
I just saw something that was pretty interesting. I don't know what exactly this therapy is called, but in South Korea, when people are becoming suicidal, there is this rehabilitation center that they bring suicidal people to where they can enact their death for that night. So they put people in a casket. First, they let them write the last letter to their loved ones. Then they put them in a casket for the night. And then in the morning, they kind of are like recovered from like tasting a bit of what suicide or death might be like. And then they go on their happy, merry ways.
Weird.
Very healthy. Very healthy.
So let me ask you, you're up there, you're reading this horror story. How many girls could relate to you?
I couldn't find anyone that was interested in horror.
Even boys?
Even boys, yeah.
What,
I
in
mean,
Canada?
It took me probably till I was about 17 to find my first horror movie friend.
Okay, because all right, because it was a phenomenon. I mean, the video
It was
store.
definitely something that was funny about me to my classmates. It was like they weren't threatened by it or anything.
But
They
you
thought
stood
it
out
was
'cause-
like funny that I was
What
like
were they into?
all
You're
this
into horror, but what are
Canada,
they
heavy
into?
metal and
Shopping.
pro wrestling.
They're into shopping.
Shopping.
Bret Hart.
fries and gravy.
Hockey, Putin.
Well, we didn't have poutine in Ontario. That was more like a Quebec thing.
Okay, but it's the same
But
thing.
fries and gravy.
Exactly.
How did you survive just living in your family? Like you're going to school, you're obsessed with horror.
I spent a lot of time in my room.
Did you have a good video store near your house?
I had an okay video store, but
This is
but weirdly,
pre-internet,
I would
though.
we didn't have a VCR ourselves until
Really?
the early 80s, So
Oh, yeah,
it was
well, yeah.
we would sometimes rent one,
Yep.
or my friends who lived across the street, their mom was a teacher and she could get one from school and bring it home sometimes, and we'd go watch movies at their house. So for a while, probably till about 1982 or 83, we didn't have our own VCR. And so I would tape stuff off television, and we were
censored versions,
we were on
or-
the Detroit border, and by some weird miracle, when HBO was new, we got the
You had
signal.
access.
We got the signal for free. We just got
For
it
free?
somehow. Yeah,
Very
we were
good.
not because
Pirating.
it wasn't for Canada. It was an
But it was
American.
still cable television.
You didn't even
How'd
know
get
you were a
I
pirate.
had no clue. We
was
had antennas and
secret
stuff. I'm sure
pirate.
my dad probably rigged something up.
So you're 12 or older, you're writing your own horror stories, you're reading them in class, you're waiting for the latest horror films to come out. Was music a part of your life at that point too, or?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was as a kid, I would say music was definitely hugely important to me as a kid. My first record was probably $1 Billion Babies by Alice Cooper.
I love you
That's-
for that,
oh, yes.
because that's one of my favorite albums still. Did you get those rock concerts that used to be on TV late night? I think you're a little younger than I am, because Alice Cooper...
Like Don Kirshner's rock
Exactly.
concert? Yeah, I think so.
Oh, Alice Cooper, $1 Billion Baby is still one of my favorite albums.
Yeah.
After that, he sucks, but whatever.
Well, what kind of music were the kids, your peers?
Well, no,
listening
besides $Billion
Duran
Babies,
Okay.
what better antidote than Alice Cooper? So besides Alice Cooper, what else was coming in?
My favorite 45 that I burned it out and I would have to get new copies of it was The Sweet. I had this 45
We play it all
that
the
was
time in the
like
van.
Which
Weasel
song?
Fox on the Run
Fox
and
on the
Burn
Run.
on the Flame.
Okay,
on the other
that's
side.
great. Yeah.
I loved glam. I still love glam.
Yeah.
And I still love early Alice Cooper, and I love Bowie until Diamond Dogs.
Yeah. But like The Sweet for me as a kid was amazing because a lot of that like British glam had that like stomping like.
Well, and also
Yeah.
you probably
sound.
smelled how
Yeah.
dangerous it really was
But
under
it
the
also,
bubble gum.
It was also like a really interesting transition from children's music. You know?
Well, we were talking
Like,
about that in the car the other
Well,
day.
that's it. Especially glam is like very kind of infantile, but it's sexy, and there's some kind of lurking danger under
But
it.
it kind of reminds me of the clown handing out candy and balloons to the kids because when you hear the screams of the girls in the audience, they all sound like they're 12, and you have these
Yeah.
Well,
20-somethings in makeup
Well,
trying to
also,
fuck
look,
them.
look, you're talking
But
about
that's how old the audience was for a large part. I mean, they were marketed a lot.
And you're talking about the Sweet, who, one of their big songs after they started to deteriorate is, if you won't fuck us, then someone else will. I love that sleazy kind of shit music. I love glam. I love boys dressed as girls. I love makeup on men. I ran away for the New York Dolls.
Except for with Slade. They were looking a
Well, they
little-
couldn't
they were
hide
looking
their
a little rough.
ugliness. They couldn't hide their ugliness.
But then it was interesting because I had like a sister who was 10 years older than me, and that's how I got that Alice Cooper record was from her because she was like, "Oh, you like all this horror stuff," and so she thought I would like that record.
And you did.
But she ran away from home when I was about 6, so she
How
was
old was she?
16. She was 16.
She
ran
was
away.
wise. She got out.
10 years
And
older.
she left all of her. She woke me up in the middle of the night and she was like, "I'm running away. You can have all my records."
Were you like, God, can I go with you?
Yeah, pretty much.
By 6, you know, don't you?
Yeah.
By 6, you knew something was wrong.
Yeah, I already wanted to be like taken away.
Did you run away?
I ran away so many times. The first time I remember running away, I had this like tiny suitcase that was like this big. It was like a children's suitcase, and I remember packing my blanket and my like a stuffed animal, and I got down to like maybe 2 blocks away.
How old were you?
Somebody
6, 8?
found me.
8?
I must have been like 5 or something. And somebody found me and was like, "Where are you?
don't
Like,
bring
where are
me
your
back
parents?" And I was like, "I'm
home.
running away."
Well,
The thing is, why don't if only the parents would run away more? It's,
It's
like,
classic.
get the hell out of here. By 6, some of us know it's not right,
Yeah.
what's going on. Then we become, by some standards, the wrong ones. But no, we're going into what's considered the wrong to make our lives right by going further and controlling and owning the real life horror.
It's
Transmuting
interesting
into something else.
because I have like an aunt who in my family, my Aunt Verge, she's passed away now, but she was always kind of like a very outspoken member of the family. And she always would say to me, there's 2 types of people. There's people who want to talk about the problem and people who don't want to talk about the problem. And when you are the person who wants to talk about the problem, you become the problem.
To the
And then
other people
to
that
the
don't
other
want to
people,
talk about
they're
it.
like, all of a sudden, you're the problem.
Right, because you have the nerve to
And
talk
then,
about
and
it.
it's like all through my childhood, I could tell my brother just couldn't wait for me to be like taken away by social services or go to
because
reform
you were
school.
talking
because
about it.
he just was like,
Don't
if
be
everything
reminded.
would be so much easier if you weren't
shut
here.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you know what? Whatever it is, whatever form of neglect, abuse, or trauma it is that the nuclear family most often has, they often don't talk about it. As horror and real life horror aficionados is to fucking talk about
Well,
it.
I talk about it all the fucking
Is
time.
to get
but-
over it. Is to know that we were not alone. Is to know that, and that's why you wrote a book that's so, what's the word? Complete. Depicting so many different forms of females painted as insanity, as the victims of crimes that were committed by other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another thing that brings us together is we are talking about the shit you should shut up about. You know what? We're not going to shut up because we knew it was wrong from the age of fucking 6.
But it sounds like you had a lot of things figured out at a young age. You knew you didn't want to.
Excuse me. Wait, I'm going to interrupt. You may think you have a lot of things figured out, but once you've been the victim, and I don't like that word, once trauma has come into you, trauma as a greedy emotion will find multiple ways to come back and remind you it wants more. Talk about that for a minute, please.
like a lot of the characters in the book, even if they are considered the villainous characters of the movie or whatever, they are, at a certain point I would be watching these movies and I would be like, to me, they're just actually acting normal. They're just acting in a realistic way of how you would respond if somebody had done those things to you. So to me, their behavior didn't actually seem that crazy at all. So even though the book is called House of Psychotic Women and it's about crazy women
who have been painted
so
that way.
So much of their behavior was behavior that I was like,
that women should
that
embrace
just seems
more
like
often.
a normal response to someone hurting you in that way, and it's interesting that through narrative depictions that has become pathologized, to where this is considered like outrageous behavior or hysterical behavior.
Well, I mean, look, even talking about it within the family is considered outrageous behavior.
Yeah.
Shut up. No,
Yeah.
we won't. No, we didn't. No, we will not.
Well, the idea of isolation, I mean, Poe touched on this all the time, of insanity, environment, what's real, isolation, and of course, if you are an independent person, especially in a place where you don't have access to maybe all the people you'd like to relate to, you are isolated. And then sanity is challenged because everyone's actually trying to justify their fucking pedestrian decisions as normality. And if you don't agree with that, then you're isolated more.
When did you realize you really had to fucking get away from the family?
6.
That is your family. No, when did you actually take the first step? I mean, you kept running away.
When
you
I was
said.
12. So when I was
Good
12,
idea.
I ran away again. And
Was your suitcase bigger this time?
Yeah. At that point, I think I got away for a few days. And then a social worker became involved. I got put in my first group home. So I went through...
how fucking awful is that for anybody?
It was weird. It was because the group home I was in, that turned out my sister had been in also.
Were you still in communication with your sister at that point?
We were later. Like, she went away for several years and I didn't hear from her, and then she came back. She didn't live at home with us, but she came back.
She's 22 at this point.
The
She's 10 years.
city. Yeah. But so the group home that I went into was in Windsor. It was called the Inn. And the weirdest thing was that the bedrooms were on the second floor and they were all connected. And of course, people would be territorial about their room. So whenever you had to walk through someone's room to get to your room, it would be like you'd be antagonized by somebody. But then for some reason, the staff would also switch your room every week.
Why?
I have no idea, but all it did was like any time a girl would get kind of like situated in her room, she would have to pack everything up and move to another room.
How long were you in that group home?
I was there a couple of times, so I was there.
The same one.
Yeah, I was there. I was there, and then I was gone, and then I was back
when
again.
You're there, are you thinking, this is fucking hell, I hate you all, I will get revenge?
Not necessarily, because I adapt pretty easily to those situations. So it's like when I first go into those places, of course, I would be totally freaked out, and I was also younger than a lot of the girls too,
and more beautiful.
And
of course,
but the thing that I did was a thing that I ended up doing all through all the reform schools and everything, which is that I wrote stories. So I wrote stories that I would read to the other girls. And so I made this like soap opera, and every day I would write a new episode of this soap opera, and all the girls would gather around the table.
Creative.
And
creating your own company.
And I provided something that was useful to these girls.
So you're in and out of that unbearable bullshit. But was it better than being at your home with your parents?
It was in some ways, but anytime you actually wanted to do something, because we would go to school, we still would leave every day to go to our normal school. And so anytime the other kids at school wanted to do something, you couldn't do anything with them.
You had to go back to the base.
Yeah. So you
were in lockdown.
Yeah. So you weren't allowed to like participate in a lot of other things. And so that was when it became a bummer, And then also some girls, they would just decide they wanted to pick a fight with you. There was like one girl who wanted to kill me because I didn't believe that her boyfriend was the guy on the Beastie Boys album who said, "Looking at my Gucci, it's about that time." She was like, "My boyfriend is that guy on that record." And I was like, "I don't believe you. You're 13.
I don't care. Yeah.
And then she literally tried to strangle me.
And so what did you do?
Kill me.
And how did you fight back from that?
Mostly I laughed because like I have a nervous laughter problem.
I've always thought of you as a secret chuckle fucker. And there she goes. And you know what? You laugh in the face of fear. It is no longer fear. It's farce.
What do you think of Chucky?
Not really a fan of Chucky.
Fair enough.
His
fair
bride.
enough,
Or
fair
that
enough.
crap.
Fair enough. So all right. So then you're institutionalized a few times. You have a decent video store. You're taking in what you can take in.
In and out of these homes you should not be in.
You're in Catholic school. What'd you think of Silent Night, Deadly Night?
Oh, well, I was a fan of Silent Night, Deadly Night. Right. And, but of course it was like subject to censorship in Ontario.
Yeah, it was a big one.
lived.
I had to get my dad to rent it. It was NC-17, and he went to the video store. He's like, do you have Silent Deadly Night? And the dork behind the thing, he goes, unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, we didn't have NC-17 because we had Canadian rating system, which was different. But there was definitely some... I'm trying to remember how I would have seen it because I may have actually seen it on one of the American channels.
Ah, all right. Okay.
Because I don't know that.
Let's sally forward. You're in and out of these reform schools or houses because you can't stand your own house. It's either place is terrible, but you have hope and you're getting by with horror and farce and making people laugh and then they bully you. How long were you in there, and when finally did you break free and say, "That's enough. I'm out. Fuck you"?
Well, I was in that particular place for maybe 5 months, I think, and then I got sent to go live with an aunt who was at that time going through some issues, and she had become like a Christian fanatic. She had some of her own trauma that she was recovering from, and she sort of turned to Jesus and all of that stuff as her way out of it. But it meant that, you know, she wanted to take me in because she was,
Did she think
wanted
you
to
were
be a good Samaritan.
possessed by Satan?
But that sort of happened where it was like, you know, you were asking me about music and stuff. So around the time when I was 13 was when my musical tastes shifted, probably 12. I mean, like I had like classic rock records that I had inherited from my sister. But, and then when I was about 12 or 13, somebody said to me, "Oh, have you ever heard Brave New Waves?" which was this radio show that was on the CBC late nights. It started at 11 o'clock at night and ran
what else were we doing in our
most of the
bedrooms
night.
when we're that old but listening
And
to
so
music?
I would just started listening to the radio. And so it was literally like in one day going from Casey Kasem's Top 40 to like Nurse with Wound, you know, because that's the
Real
type of
ugly
stuff
shit.
that would play. And I mean, they would play all kinds of stuff. You know, they'd play like avant-garde jazz, and they would play like
just
all kinds of
counterculture
punk
music
I'd never heard and whatever. But it was like this total shift. And so at that point, I was just like, oh, I want this stuff, you know, and I need to find more music like this, and I need to find people who like this kind of music.
And this is really right. The internet wasn't as it is now.
It didn't exist.
No, it didn't exist.
It didn't exist.
And how do you find people then? I mean, whether you're in your own
go
home.
to record stores.
Exactly.
Look at people's
Maybe to the radio station itself. You
I don't
might
know.
write to people, actually. We've done that.
But it was like
But you
starting
knew they
to
were
get
out
into
there.
that music.
And
was,
you knew they were out there. People were out there.
Yeah. It was just a weird time because like my Christian aunt was, you know, and my mom and everybody was like very freaked out by the fact that I had started to listen to this type of music because, you know, the Quincy Punk episode, you know,
I saw it.
came
I
on
saw
and
it.
my mom.
Oh, ridiculous.
So basically, you were obsessed with Carrie, and then you found yourself in a Carrie situation. Someone overseeing you as being kind of a rogue teenager in her environment, and then you have this Christian woman that's basically you're dealing with when you go out of the house, and you're dealing with it in a very different way in the house. It's almost like self-fulfilled prophecy or something.
And the bullshit is always this. The horror you have to withstand, which they will never admit to or very, very seldom admit to, when it is reflected in music, art, or movies as a symptom of the real problem, reflecting society's ills and sicknesses, they don't want you to go there when they are why these things exist. Because the nuclear family, because the fascism of this, because men's madness, because of sexual insanity, because of neglect or abuse exists worldwide. And so do not listen to a reflection of a symptom of society, which is only that a mirror the illness which we have all been infected with.
Mm-hmm. And the big fear was that most people thought that this kind of media would make you violent, you know,
as opposed to being a relief.
And people could never see that, like, the anger that I had and all the issues I had were not because of the movies. The movies were more appealing to me because I had those emotions.
And because you could live and the same with pornography or murder rap. Like, actually, they relieve a lot of the burden of people that have been frustrated, that are angry. It is a way that somebody else can do that for us through art.
Right.
And it causes more relief than it incites insanity or violence.
Right.
I want to know about the real breakout.
Yeah.
Music is saving you. Horror film is saving you. You're in and out of the reform school. Now you're with your aunt, the Christian fucking Carrie workshop of hell. When can you find? I mean, what do we have?
Well, then I tried to. So I was 15, and I tried to kill myself again. This
Again,
is
the
different
wrong
time.
target.
Different
You
time.
should have tried to kill the abusers,
But
not
as
yourself.
a result of that incident, I got sent to Winnipeg, Manitoba, where there was a
Oh boy.
adolescent like treatment center.
And that's talking about isolated.
Yeah.
Winnipeg.
So my
I mean,
dad lived
treatment.
there.
Really?
And so I had to go stay. And my dad was like, we saw him 3 times a year. We weren't especially close. And
Did you want to be?
no, I didn't want to be
course
there.
not.
So I had to go into this place, but they made me stay with my dad for, a waiting list, before I could get into this place. And then my dad, I ended up trying to stab my dad.
Did you have a psychotic episode, or was there a...
No, he was actually not the dad that I had the real anger issues with. I had 2 dads. I had a stepdad, and I had my dad that we didn't see that often.
Yeah.
My stepdad was the one that I had more actual
So why
issues
did Dad
with.
then become the target?
It was kind of a weird situation where he went out of town for a while and left his credit card behind, and so I just went shopping with it and decided
that's
to
what
just
that's what young girls do.
buy clothes or records and stuff. And then I felt guilty about it when he got back, and I told him that I had used his credit card. So he wanted to see all the stuff that I got. He was like, well, I'm going to let you keep it, but I just want to see everything you bought. And I was like, okay. So I started showing him all the stuff, and then he just grabbed it all and ran up to his room. And I followed him, and then he pushed me, and I fell into a closet, and it kind of broke the closet. It was one of those sliding door, and it just broke the door through, and I fell. And it was not that bad of an incident or anything, but it was just all of a sudden it was
you saw
this.
red.
It was
Yeah.
I saw red, and
saw
it was
red.
all this shit from
And by the way, what was he
before.
doing with all your shit up in his bedroom? Was he going to try your clothes on, listen to
No,
your
he
records?
he was lying to me. He wanted me
Destroy
to pull
them.
it all out
You
so
wanted
he
to
could go
return it
return
and make
it.
his money back.
What a
Yeah.
dick.
Yeah, I tried to stab him.
Ah,
And my brother, who was at university at the time and living with my dad, came in right at that moment.
He got stabbed?
No, he just ran in and pinned
Wow.
me on the floor.
and by
Whoa.
the way, that wasn't really the man you wanted to stab. He was
No.
just the convenient man at the time. I did stab my brother.
Well,
in the
I
hand.
mean, also Winnipeg. I can't believe there's not more. And there is a lot of violence, domestic violence there, because you're inside 9.5 months a year because it's
Winnipeg is a super violent place.
Let's take this back for a minute. Your brother pins you to the floor.
Yeah.
You
And then
saw
my
red
dad
first.
calls the place that I was on the waiting list
I mean,
for,
Dad, you dick.
and then they get me put in right away. So,
That
it
was dumb, and so was Dad. And this sucks.
So what's a Manitoba youth institution like? It seems like that'd be even more extreme than Ontario. I could be wrong though.
They're pretty rough, but the place I was in first was for mental assessment. So you live there and you stay there and you take Rorschach tests and you do group therapy and all this kind of stuff. And then they're supposed to decide at the end of the 6 weeks
By
where
the way,
you go.
you're already
whether
extremely
you go
intelligent.
home
You're
or-
already extremely intelligent. So you saw red. You got a bit of violent tendencies.
But I want to hear
And?
what this Manitoba place is
Well,
like.
I want to know what she did to convince them to let her out, or how long she
They
was in
didn't
there.
let me out
No.
because they decided that I wasn't crazy, but that I was
Violent.
Dangerous.
Dangerous.
Yeah, I was violent.
They didn't realize really more dangerous to yourself than others,
Yeah.
because, as in so many horror films, often women become the victim, the re-victim, after they've been victimized. They then turn the knife against themselves.
Yeah. But it is interesting that a lot of women that I encountered in all these places, a lot of them were cutters, and a lot of them were self-harming and stuff like
why
that.
are they cutting?
And they were
they're-
angry at other people, but they were
They were
not
cutting
in
themselves.
themselves.
Well, because look, cutters, they can see the pain manifest in blood.
Mm-hmm.
If you have trauma that you cannot articulate, and trauma is greedy, and it will find a way, the body bears the burden, and people cut themselves so they can actually feel the release of blood flowing when really they should. I'm not advocating this.
But they should, but they should.
The target is really the abusers originally. And most cutters are women, not all. And again, it's I feel very lucky that I never turned the knife against myself. I always wanted to turn it outward, which is one of the reasons I began speaking out about familial abuse and trauma and the victimization and political bullshit and et cetera, et cetera.
But one of the interesting things about going. So when I was 16, I got out of this place. On my 16th birthday, I got out of that treatment center and put into a reform school. So this was like full on lockup.
Because you weren't finished yet learning a lesson of bullshit.
Yeah, so I was going to be in that place for about 3 months before I got out and got put in a foster home. But being in that place was kind of amazing because, in retrospect, it was kind of amazing. It was hellish being in there, but it was like 70 or 75% Aboriginal kids.
I would imagine.
Indigenous kids.
Yep.
And it was my first real experience with that whole aspect of culture and how big of a part of Manitoba
is
culture
ridiculous.
How
it is.
abused,
so insane.
how abused these people
And
women
just
have been.
like how, and also I was able to see firsthand, which again, at the time, not realizing how privileged I was being treated compared to a lot of the other kids. Like I had actually tried to stab somebody versus some of these kids who their parents had
Just didn't
you know,
want
it was
them.
like their parents had beat them. And they got put in there because they were beaten, not because they even did anything. And somehow I got treated better than
as a
them, even
blonde
though I
white.
had actually tried to kill somebody. You know, so that was another learning experience like
And
that
you saw
first
that,
group
right?
home.
Exactly, and you see this.
Yeah.
And that this all starts to make sense and starts to pile.
You
up.
got inside info now.
You know, before I had always complained about authority figures, and it was not until being in that place that I really felt like, oh, this isn't just me having a problem with authority. This is like there is a problem with authority.
Institutionalized
period, you know?
authority.
Yeah.
And authority running the institutions.
Yeah.
A lot of people in your position or in those positions, they don't survive it, or they further victimize themselves. And I'm sure there was a point when you were further victimizing yourself. When did you decide, okay, that's enough? Stop it.
I think like one of the big changes came with one of the foster homes that I was in, where I had a foster mother who had been a foster kid herself, and she had all these foster kids just to make money, pretty much. It was like her means of income.
Gross.
But she was a mess. Like she was not like a super strict suburban type of mom. She was like an alcoholic, and she had all these like biker parties. And I ended up emerging in that household as
How old?
I would have been
17?
16, 17.
Yeah.
And I emerged as like the responsible one in the house. And it was kind of weird going from being like this kid who everybody thought was like out of control, and to being like having to separate people in fights and try to, you know, take this diplomatic role, you know. So that was like one of the big changes for me. But then also, it wasn't until my mid-20s that I started actively doing stuff with horror. I sort of spent many years rambling, you know, like just hanging out with kids, going to shows, watching a lot of movies, but not really doing anything with that stuff. And then I ended up starting a zine, like a horror zine. And
were you still in Winnipeg at this point?
No, at this point I moved to Vancouver when I was about 21.
When you were free of the homes and all of that?
So I had been living on my own for a couple of years.
How were you supporting yourself?
Well, at first, when I was 17, I got on the independent living program, which is like Children's Aid has this program where they pay, it's like welfare, but for kids. So they pay your rent, but you have to go to school and you have to have a job 20 hours a week. And I got this amazing job that was at this cafe in Winnipeg called the Blue Note Cafe. It was an all-night cafe, and I lucked into a job bussing tables there, and
where kind of cool people might have come.
And it was that was a really great place. And my favorite band at the time was the Gruesomes, which was this Montreal band. And
perfect name for you.
And they would come in there sometimes when they were playing, and so that was like the exciting thing for me, was getting to bus their table.
Because you found your own.
Yeah. You know, so I sort of started to meet some people that I liked a bit more, and some more horror people and stuff. And then eventually I moved out to Vancouver when I was about 20 or so. And I was rambling, and then eventually I got a job at a video store there, and then that began many years of working in video stores. And
just to get the material, of course.
I feel like
even
that was like
paying the profit. The profits are greater than the money.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah, definitely. And so I worked in video stores. I started this horror zine, and through the zine,
what was it called?
It was at first it was called Cannibal Culture, and then
appropriate.
After about 3 issues, you know, some obnoxious kid came into the video store, and he was like, you know, you write about all these movies, but we don't have any way to see any of them, because even though I worked at a video store in Canada, because of the way our rating system works, we can't just have any movie on the shelves that we want. They all have to have like an official Canadian distributor who's paid for them to get rated and everything. So we couldn't just order any movie we wanted. We were subject to whatever was officially available in Canada. And so I would be writing about all these movies that I was ordering bootlegs of and stuff. And so people were like, well, we can't see any of these movies. You know, why don't you arrange a screening of some of these movies or something?
Great idea.
And I was like, I don't know how to do anything like that. So I was going to school part-time. I had gone back to, I was going to college. And
what were you studying?
Medieval studies.
That's all right.
Because that's going to get you far in this life.
Beowulf can get you really far.
But so I was going to school and doing the zine, and so I went to this local micro cinema called The Blinding Light and said, you know, I have this list of horror movies, you know, and if you play these movies, you know, I can help promote it through my zine or whatever. 4 months later, he got back to me and he said, okay, so I'm booking the calendar for June. What are the dates that you want for your horror film festival?
Heaven.
I was like, I don't have a horror film festival. And he was like, but didn't you bring me a list of movies? And I was like, yeah, that was just for you to play. They were like recommendations of movies for you to play. And he was like, oh, I thought you wanted to like rent the theater and then put on a horror film festival. And I was like, oh, well, how much is it to rent the theater? And he was like, $200 a day. Whoa. And I had just gotten my student loan. Like I literally just gotten it. And I was like, okay, I'll book the theater. I'll book the theater. And so I
Young
just like
entrepreneur.
I put on my first film festival, which was called CineMuerte. There was like these Mexican murder magazines called Muerte.
Yes.
And I named it kind
real
of after
murders,
that.
though, right?
Yeah.
Real murders.
Yeah.
Real horrible graphic pictures of people that have been murdered.
Yeah. And then that was kind of the beginning of
And you were at this point like 18 now?
No, God, no. I was like 26 by this point. Like I said, I spent many years just kind of like doing,
but
just
by this
passively
point,
watching
you're
movies.
an expert. So you should use your expertise.
Yeah.
And so then did that give you the impetus like, all right, I can do this?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like after I did that the first year and people actually came, and it was weird because I didn't know that many horror fans. So the fact that like all these people came and they all thought they were the only horror fan too, you know, like they didn't know any other horror fans, and then they all just came and they're like, wow,
and
there's
here's
like
your real family.
Yeah, and so it just kind of went from there. And then doing the fanzine, Fangoria magazine contacted me and asked me if I would do some writing for them. So then I started getting like actual paid gigs writing about horror for Fangoria. And then it just went on, you know, to where I was like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put on film festivals and be a film programmer and
so
write about
you're doing that, and that's cool. And when did you decide, okay, I got to work on this book?
Around 30 years old, maybe. My friend Sam McKinley, it was a combination of things where it was like people would come in the video store and they'd be like, every movie you recommend to me has some crazy woman in it.
You're like, oh, yes, yeah.
And then my friend Sam was like, oh, that's like a Janisse special, you know, whenever there was like a crazy woman movie. And it was like between all this feedback, I started realizing like, oh, that is weird.
Because
I am really drawn to those
there is no
movies.
other encyclopedic review or compilation like the House of Psychotic Women. I mean, it is kind of the ultimate encyclopedia of horror films which depict women in various forms of so-called neuroses, psychoses, victimization.
Yeah.
And it is the ultimate book on that.
Yeah.
But that took 10 years.
Yeah.
Because you throw it out, come back, throw it out, come back.
Yeah. I just wasn't really sure about the structure. And then when it was kind of suggested to me by a couple of friends, they were like, you know, you really should write about your own experiences and how it relates to these films. And I was like, who's going to care about that? Who's going to want to read about my life?
Little did you know, there's many of us out there.
But I totally thought, so when I sent it to the publisher...
who was the publisher?
So the publisher was Fab Press in the UK, and the guy who ran that company...
They put out a lot of great books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I had known him from film festivals, so he would be at a lot of the film festivals I was at, and that's how we knew each other. And so I proposed the book to him, and when I sent it to him, I totally expected him to reject it and just be like, well, this is not the kind of thing we publish, it's too personal or whatever. But instead, he came back and he was like, oh my God, I love it. I love it.
Because anybody that reads it loves it, so please order it, people. It's the House of Psychotic Women.
I didn't expect that. I totally expected that when the book came out, that all the horror fans would be like, oh, boo-hoo, your crappy life, and, you know, like, who wants to read that? And I was just steeling myself for everybody just, like, making fun of me. I was like, okay, this is going to be the response. Everybody's going to make fun of me for it being so personal.
And
then
they loved it. So then what? So now they love it. What then?
So
did it change anything in your own viewpoint of yourself?
It definitely made me feel as though I shouldn't question the weirder ideas that I have.
Absolutely not, honey.
If I had an idea that seemed kind of out there or whatever,
not
that I
alone.
should just pursue it.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, we are not alone.
Yeah. And I think, too, it was like a lot of people contacted me just saying that, I never realized it until I read this book, that I actually relate to movies that way, too. Like I relate to movies autobiographically a lot of times, and I hadn't really thought of it until I read it structured that way.
People paint themselves in different roles.
Yeah. But it is, because it is art, it's a way, it's a natural escape, and it's a way for people to navigate
It's a
through
relief.
those problems.
It's a relief. It is not an inspiration to do more horror or more violence. It is a relief so that other weirdos or people that have violent tendencies or horrific tendencies don't feel so isolated.
Yeah.
And you can live out that violence through films or music or art so that you don't actually have to do it. Now, what's next? You also do horror workshops. What does that mean? What is a horror workshop?
So I have an organization I founded called the Miskatonic Institute of Horror Studies, and I started that in 2010, and it's to put on classes about horror history, horror theory, horror production, and we just have classes in, there's branches of it. There's one here in LA, there's one in New York, one in London, and they're all run by different friends of mine, that sort of people who live there.
Are they like once a month or?
They're once a month, yeah. And they are classes, and so there's no like actual accreditation or anything like that, but people can buy tickets to a whole season or something, and then it just, we just curate them kind of together, between me and the other co-directors. We sort of curate the classes, try to find different experts in things, and sometimes we'll bring them in from somewhere else, and so they're just like ticketed events, like social events, but they are AV presentations, where it's like PowerPoint and clips and audio and readings and all kinds of multimedia talking about a certain topic,
It must feel, after writing something that took 10 years or more in the making, that is pretty complete. I mean, I don't feel, do you feel there's anything left out? I don't, of the House of Psychotic Women.
I mean,
or
there is
there a
now.
volume 2 coming?
There's definitely going to be a volume 2.
I hope so.
For the 10th anniversary of the book, which will be in like 2 years, I'm planning to do another edition of the book that has probably 100 more movies in it. Because interestingly, after the book came out, there started to be all of a sudden a huge wave of more movies like that, and I don't know whether some of them were inspired by the book in some way, where it was like, concretizing or contextualizing things in a certain way made people realize like, oh, this is like kind of its own subgenre, and I want to make a movie in that subgenre. But you started to get a lot more of these types of movies, and so now there's all kinds of more movies that could be written about.
And
so
I can't wait for you to write those. Where are you now?
Well, now...
Where are you now as a woman?
Well, actually, for the last couple of years, I've been as close to that teenage place as I've been in a while.
Okay.
So
wait.
It's like,
wait.
I sort of like got back there a little bit, and I'm
Meaning
kind
what?
of crawling out of it now.
Because again, these things are cyclical. Trauma lives in the body. It does want more.
Yeah.
So do you mean that in the terms of like violence or self-harm or what? What do you mean?
I just mean definitely feeling like not in control of my behavior.
Maybe you need to box. It's a very good form of getting out your aggression. I really recommend it for all women. But what, do you think you have violent tendencies, or do you have violent?
I've definitely had violent tendencies come back kind of over
and
the
also,
last
do you
2 years.
do you also feel that violent tendencies are manifested against yourself? Like you want violence against yourself, or do you want violence against others?
It's violence against other people.
But is it? But it is something that look, anybody that does not have violence in their bloodline doesn't know what we're talking about when we say this. I control myself every minute that I'm alive. I have a polluted bloodline, as you do. We have violent tendencies. Doesn't mean we act them out. Often we act them out against ourselves using other people's hands to manifest what we need and should be manifested against others. Your teenage years are pulling the full circle.
You've come so far.
Right.
And if you have a pattern growing up where any kind of stability is immediately destroyed by violence, instability, inconsistency.
Also, we don't want to be bored.
If you start projecting that, because actually stability is so unfamiliar for any long period of time.
Do you rebel against?
No, I definitely think that's true, that I sabotage things because, again, as we were talking about, like control issues and people cutting to have control and watching horror movies to have control, and I feel as though in some ways choosing to go crazy or to be out of control is my way of controlling the situation.
Yeah. But I mean,
when it's
first
like
of
when
all,
people are behaving in a
right.
way that's hurting me, and it's like they don't care, they don't give a shit like what they're doing to me or how they're affecting me. So the only thing I can control is how I act, and so my tendency will often be to go to a place of comfort,
Familiarity.
and familiarity for
Which
myself,
is?
which often tends to be a
Violence.
place of violence and anger.
Yeah.
Exactly. Men have various ways of expressing their violence. Sports, war. We have very little ways. And, women are always ostracized because of violence. And the thing is, look, sometimes people come to me with an urge to inspire me to be violent against them, but knowing some of them that I will do it, but I will do it out of the compassion of knowing sometimes you need to commit violence. Sometimes you need violence committed against you just so you can feel something other than insane. This has been the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Kier-La Janisse, House of Psychotic Women, Volume 2 coming soon. Please investigate.